Are you dreading the conversation with your doctor about statins? Well, maybe there's a reason for that. Let's look at some warning signs that may tell you that your relationship with your doctor isn't what it should be. Stay tuned. Let's get some definitions out of the way first. When I say gaslighting, I mean it's a situation where someone in a position of some kind of authority is trying to make you believe something that contradicts what you're experiencing. That doctor I mentioned in an earlier video who insisted that anyone can feel muscle pains, it's not the statins, he is a gaslighter. If he was my doctor, definitely he'd be trying to gaslight me. Related to that concept is the concept of a pious fraud, and that's when your doctor really actually believe they know what's best for you and they're willing to do or say anything to get you to do what they want. It's an ends justifying the means kind of thinking, and it's dishonest no matter how noble the intent is. Now, to be clear, 99% or more of doctors wouldn't dream of engaging in this kind of behavior, but my viewers are a self-selected group and have probably experienced this at a much higher rate than in the general population. So we're going to go over a bunch of what I call red flags that indicate that maybe your doctor's not playing fair with you. First is that they repeat many of those 10 lies that I mentioned in an earlier video, and I'll put a link to that in the description. I've listed the 6 most pertinent ones here, and I covered them in that video, so I'm not going to go into any more here, but be aware of them. The next red flag, they don't take your question seriously. You ask a deep and intelligent question and it gets dismissed immediately. You know damn well that from how they handled it that they didn't really even bother to understand or consider your question. They just see it as an anti-statin position or question and they come out with a pro-statin position. So here's a couple of examples. Early on in my statin odyssey, I did get off statins, and as you might expect, my cholesterol went up. I mean, that's not a surprise there. So I asked my doctor if there was a rebound effect where by getting off statins, you're allowing your liver to take off again, make cholesterol without driving with the emergency brake on, so to speak. And it overachieved a little before it settled down. It was just a hypothesis on my part. It's like what I show in this graph here. It's just something I really wanted to know. Is this possible? My doctor told me there was no such thing. And that was a lie. Not because she was necessarily wrong, but it's because I still can't find any clinical studies that even address the issue. So if you know of one, please give me a link to it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. But the point is, she answered immediately and forcefully without even giving it a thought. So in other words, she didn't even listen to the question. I mean, you can tell when you ask somebody something and they come back with something that fast. Hey, this was a complicated question and you came back so fast with the answer, I know you didn't give it a thought and you didn't take it seriously. Another question I asked, is there a correlation between cholesterol lowering effectiveness on an individual by the statin and the intensity of their adverse effects? I mean, it certainly makes sense that this could be the case, especially if you follow the chain of biochemical reactions between where the statins do their dirty work and the actual production of cholesterol. There's a lot of other things that are impacted along the way, and many of them are vital to our health, such as CoQ10. But nope, she'd hear none of it. This next one is pretty simple. Ask about any study or article, and even a prestigious journal, and a doctor dismisses it with a terse that study was flawed. Now, this could mean one of two things. They may be actually familiar with the article and familiar with the counter arguments of the statin advocates and has come to the conclusion that it's flawed. You may not agree, but at least that's kind of a legitimate thought process. It may also mean that because it contradicts their preconceived notion, then it was flawed by definition. In other words, they're kind of arguing in a circle. They're just preemptively saying, oh, it's saying something other than what I believe, therefore it was flawed. Another red flag, they won't tell you your risk or how they arrived at that. Or if they do tell you, they're unaware of just how bad the risk calculators are. I covered that in an earlier video too. I'll put a link to that. They may also not understand the difference between absolute and relative risk, or they may not realize that they're giving you a relative risk reduction when you really want to know an absolute risk reduction. And they may not even understand number needed to treat. They might not want to admit to you that in all cases, no matter what your risk level is, fewer people are helped by statins than are not helped by statins. And you can easily compute your number needed to treat for Lipitor's 36% relative risk reduction by simply dividing 278 by your risk percentage. I can't do that in my head, but there's a calculator on your phone. You can quickly do that. For example, if your risk is 7.5%, that's often a threshold used to try putting people on statins. That means that 37 people just like you would have to take the statin for one of you to benefit. The other 36 of you aren't going to benefit. If you present your doctor with this and they go into how it doesn't matter, everyone benefits from lower cholesterol whether they have a heart attack or not, well then ask in what way. It's going to probably come back full circle to the heart attack or cardiovascular event risk. The next red flag, they're treating a number. If they insist your cholesterol needs to be under 200 because that's the healthiest level, then ask about the studies that show all-cause mortality is generally minimized around a level between 220 and 240. And mortality increases more sharply for values lower than for values higher. Now, I've mentioned this before, that's a population statistic. It doesn't necessarily apply directly to you, but it certainly does not mean that everyone should be under 200, unless there's actually a special condition like you're into secondary prevention. In other words, you have had an event already. Those statistics, all rules are off. But if you're just sitting there in front of your doctor, you've had no other signs other than a blood test that says you have high cholesterol, then trying to get you under 200 to me is malpractice. Another red flag, they won't look deeper than the lipid panel. Your lipid levels are just indicators, and the horse's mouth is easily available with any of these tests here. The carotid intima media test, a coronary artery calcium score, computerized tomography angiogram. These tests together can give you a more precise assessment of what your cardiovascular risk really is, because what you're looking for, from what I understand being a non-medical professional, is soft plaque that can break off and cause either a clot in your heart, which is a heart attack, or a clot in your brain, which is a stroke. And then there's these other tests that can give you a more precise assessment of your cardiovascular health. They're more like indicators than the horse's mouth, but they go beyond what the normal lipid panel does, and that's the LP little a. LDL particle count, I'll probably have to do a video on that. Trigs over HDL ratio, and oxidized LDL and high sensitivity CRP. I think the HSCRP, high sensitivity CRP, C-reactive protein, is fairly commonly taken. So that's one that you can look at. So I recommend that you go to Dr. Ford Brewer's YouTube videos to look at these. I'll put a link to them in the description. The final red flag I want to talk about is the way they may pressure you. If they're dismissive of your value judgment that you don't want to take the statins, or they downplay any adverse effects that you report, red flag. And related to what we just talked about, they exaggerate your risk or they exaggerate the benefits. They threaten to fire you as a patient. They can't fire you because you don't work for them. They can quit as your doctor. I did look into it, and for my home state of Massachusetts, they actually can drop you as a patient if you refuse to follow their advice. But remember which way the money goes, whether it's coming out of your pocket or out of the insurance, and remind them that they get paid whether you take the statins or not. It should make no difference to them, unless, of course, they're getting incentives from the drug companies. My favorite thing is what I call the battle of the mugs. Some doctors actually have this insulting mug, the left one here, that disparages you, anything you find out on your own. After all, they went to medical school, not you. Well, it's a fair enough point. But if my doctor ever trotted out such a mug in front of me on purpose, I'd go have one made like the one on the right so I could bring it to the next visit. I have 65 years experience with my favorite subject, and I live with it 24/7, not just 20-minute extended visits twice a year. So these are the red flags I watch out for. Again, most doctors are honest, hardworking people. They have nothing but your best interests in mind. I mean, that's the great majority of them. But again, the people watching this video are probably a self-selected group who have been victims of these statin-pushing doctors. And I, unfortunately, was one of them, and I paid for that with 10 years of slowly decreasing health that I resolved pretty easily. I fired the offending employee. So as usual, please do all the things that help YouTube channels like this, and please share your story in the comments if you can do so that in a way that protects your privacy. And if you haven't seen this video, I suggest you take a look at it now. Thanks for listening.